family that endlessly had a really large backyard garden, and I assumed everyone who lived in urban places got to eat from very large backyard gardens and preserved the food they ate during the winter. And then I went to college and discovered that, in fact, was not the case. And we've got this whole part of the country that's urban. There's big institutions there, and our young people, our 18 to 22-year-olds, are spending 4 years of their lives there. And so I started thinking about how we could bring to that section of the population real food and a real love for the land, and a love and appreciation for the people who grow that food. I got lucky enough to start working at Yale. And I mean, Yale is not the institution you think of when you think of farming in any way, right? It's sort of, if you've seen photos of it, it looks like a Harry Potter type of school. It was built in the 1930s, but made to look Gothic. It once upon a time had the state land grant charter, and in fact, the farmers took it away because Yale was doing such a lousy job of being a state land grant institution. And even today, it's a very urban campus. But what we have is we have 5,000 undergraduates, and they've got to eat every day, and they want to have community, and they need to learn. And so we've tried to build a program that really will get them shared work, shared food, and shared inquiry, so they can start becoming the types of consumers and citizens that believe in stronger economies, that go to farmers market, and that truly appreciate the land. And so there's 3 ways that we do that. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on campus, and then talk a little bit about what I see at colleges across the U.S., because really this is happening everywhere. So on campus, there's 3 components. We operationalize these values. So Yale dining halls serve 1.8 million meals a year, and that's a lot of food. The grocery bill is about $8 million, and so we work with local farmers. Someone's coming to Connecticut to work on a farm, and hopefully we'll be purchasing from that farm. But we work with local farmers to purchase food that's in season, ideally food that's grown sustainably, but most importantly, food that's grown locally. Our state loses about 8,000 acres of farmland every single year, and we're trying to provide a market to combat that. And our thought is, we're right there, we're not going away, right? It's an old institution, it's pretty recession-proof. Students have to eat no matter what, and they eat a lot. And so if we can convert our grocery bill into a force for good, then we're actually able to keep farmland in the region, and ideally introduce our students to better tasting food. And one of the perks we discovered as we were building this program is our cooking staff, and this makes a lot of sense to me. I hadn't thought about it beforehand, but our cooking staff loves working with real food, right? So they're not that interested in opening cans or cryovac packages, but to be able to work with fresh produce that's been grown at a farm they've visited, and that they can see the difference in, changes their day. It makes their work a craft again, and it makes it skilled work, and it gives them some real satisfaction. I, at one point, had a cook call, and he said, "Have you seen the Swiss chard? Have you seen the Swiss chard we got from George Pirtle's farm? It's totally different than the Swiss chard that came from California." And he was literally dancing around in the kitchen with this Swiss chard in hand. But that's the power your food has when we get it into institutions where people haven't seen that difference or tasted that difference in a long time. And I think that's incredibly valuable because it converts those folks into supporters of the local farm economy, and also changes the way their children eat. At least in our dining halls, the folks who are working in our dining halls, it's their children who are most at risk for obesity and diabetes in the nation, if you look at the demographics. And if we can introduce good food right there in their everyday work environment, they're turning around and introducing it in their homes. The other 2 pieces of what we do are, we've been reformulating the extracurricular life of the college. And that's really been happening through a 1-acre college farm. And I know, like, 1 acre is not a farm. Maybe? All right. You guys are sympathetic. Usually I get called on this. Well, we had called it a garden for a long, long time, and we discovered that the young men did not come up to work when it was called a garden. They were called a farm. So in that 1-acre garden, we grow about 300 varieties. of vegetables, fruit, herbs, flowers, sold at local farmers market. The work that gets done there is either volunteer labor from students or student internships. And something really exciting happens in that space. We have students come up who have grown up in LA, grown up in New York, also grown up in Iowa, but some of them have they've never seen shovel ready, right? They've never picked up a shovel, they haven't planted seeds, and they get to do that in this space and watch something grow from start to finish and experience the pleasure of real work, or at least a touch of real work. And that changes their relationship to the land. And what I hope it to do at the end of the day is inspire them to make a lifelong commitment to food and agriculture. And what we're seeing so far is they're starting to do that. Some of them are spending a summer working with us, doing 12 weeks on our farm, and then they're spending the next summer working somewhere in the Northeast or somewhere in the Southeast or in the middle of the country on a large-scale production farm. Others are going traveling and figuring out what production of coffee beans looks like in parts of Africa. And so they're really taking this interest that starts with just time spent at one particular place and going off into the world. We also have a series of orientation programs so that you can spend your first week at Yale University on a local farm, and that is a great way to learn about the local economy as well as the local landscape. And every single week we have speakers about food and agriculture. And the idea is to get as many of these people thinking as much as possible about what's happening in food and agriculture, from the consumer's perspective, from the farmer's perspective, from a policy perspective. And the last piece of our work is, of course, it is like a college, and so students have to go to school. They can't spend all their time at the farm. And we work with faculty to build coursework on food and agriculture. And they're not looking at it through, I think, the typical production lens, but more from the side of history, from literature, from philosophy, also from political science and policy. This coming spring, in the middle of April, there'll be a great conference on the Farm Bill. If that's of interest to folks, you can Google Yale Farm Bill, and the conference listing will come up. But ideally, we're raising up a generation of citizens, consumers, parents, teachers, and policymakers, and future presidents and senators who will believe in the power of food and agriculture to connect our communities and change lives. And the last piece I want to touch on is just what's happening on college campuses. Neil pointed out that really what's happening is we're changing culture when he closed the last panel. And what I see on our college campus is you can walk around now and you'll hear students talk about raising chickens in their backyard or planting gardens. And that didn't happen a decade ago when I was at school. There was 2, 3 other students interested in food and agriculture. They were thinking about iBanking jobs, and they were thinking about consulting, and there's been a huge sea shift. So one more 18 to 22-year-olds are thinking about where their food comes from. And the change I've seen in the last 2 years is that students are also thinking about how to cook. And so they are butchering in dorm rooms. They're making dinners. They are. It's terrifying. But there's a real interest in these topics. And then across college campuses, I think there are 2 organizations in particular that are doing a phenomenal job organizing students. One is Slow Food USA, with their Slow Food in Schools program that's helping organize college students across the nation. The other is the Real Food Challenge. And so you see both of these groups are bringing together undergraduates and getting them committed to these issues. Last month, we had students from every Ivy League school, from the 8 different Ivy League schools in the nation, come together and talk about how to get their dining halls to purchase local, seasonal, and sustainable food. And I was skeptical of the idea of an Ivy-only conference. It seemed a little bit silly to me. There are public schools out there. There are state schools, and I think everyone should be purchasing this way. So the students really pushed me, and they said, no, these schools compete together. They're competing for students. Their admissions offices are paying attention to one another. Their presidents are paying attention to one another. We've got to use that competition for the sake of the food we believe in. And they had a great turnout, and these students went back energized and already going to work, changing what their schools are doing. So that's what we do, and I think we can be hopeful that these 18 to 22-year-olds are out there because they're going to be our allies in doing